My grandparents were everything to me. They raised me in their Victorian home after my parents split, teaching me about hard work and family loyalty. When they passed, they left me their entire $900,000 estate. My brother Albert always had gambling problems, and my mom Diane only showed up when money was involved. Something in my gut told me to protect what my grandparents wanted me to have. So I quietly moved everything into a trust, just in case. Before I continue my story, let me know where you are watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button if you have ever had to deal with greedy relatives. Growing up, my grandparents' Victorian house was my sanctuary. The creaking hardwood floors, the smell of cinnamon rolls on Sunday mornings, and the garden where my grandmother grew the brightest marigolds in the neighborhood. These were the constants in my otherwise chaotic childhood. After my father walked out and my mother Diane spiraled into a cycle of bad relationships, my grandparents stepped in without hesitation. My grandfather was a retired accountant who built his modest fortune through decades of disciplined saving and smart investments. "Money does not grow on trees, Nathan," he would say, showing me how to balance a checkbook when I was just 12. "But it does grow with patience and respect." Every summer, he would take me fishing at the lake behind their property, teaching me not just about catching bass, but about the value of quiet contemplation and planning ahead. My grandmother was the heart of our little family. She taught high school English for 40 years and instilled in me a love for classic literature and proper grammar. Her chocolate chip cookies were legendary in the neighborhood, and she insisted on making them from scratch, saying, "Anything worth doing is worth doing right." On rainy evenings, we would sit in the sunroom drinking hot chocolate while she read Hemingway or Steinbeck aloud, her voice bringing the words to life. My brother Albert, older by 4 years, never had the same connection with our grandparents. While I embraced their old-fashioned values, Albert chafed against them. He dropped out of college after 2 semesters, cycled through a series of dead-end jobs, and developed a gambling habit that constantly left him broke and desperate. My grandparents tried to help him countless times, paying off debts, finding him new jobs, even offering to fund trade school, but Albert always saw their assistance as control rather than love. "Your brother makes his own choices," my grandfather would say, with sadness in his eyes. "We can only hope he finds his way before it costs him everything." The disappointment in his voice whenever Albert called asking for money or disappeared for months at a time broke my heart. Despite everything, they never gave up on him keeping his childhood bedroom ready for whenever he might return home. The day my grandfather died from a massive stroke, the world lost its color. I had just finished my shift at the architectural firm where I worked when I got the call from my grandmother. Her voice was steady but hollow as she said, "He is gone, Nathan. Just like that, he is gone." I moved into their house that night to take care of her. For 3 months, she went through the motions of living, cooking meals. She barely touched, tending to her garden with mechanical precision, and sitting in my grandfather's chair every evening, staring at his empty spot on the sofa. When she passed in her sleep one night, the doctor called it natural causes, but everyone knew she died of a broken heart. The reading of the will took place on a rainy Tuesday in April. The family lawyer, Mr. Thompson, who had been my grandparents' friend for decades, cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses before reading the simple document. "To our grandson, Nathan James Reynolds, we leave our entire estate, including our home, at 1423 Maple Avenue, all financial accounts and personal belongings. He has shown the character, responsibility, and love for family that we value most, and we trust him to honor our legacy." The silence in the room was deafening. I sat stunned, staring at the carpet. The house alone was worth around $650,000. Their savings accounts held another $180,000. The antique furniture, my grandmother's jewelry, and my grandfather's coin collection were valued at approximately $70,000. All told, nearly $900,000. I looked up to see Albert's face frozen in disbelief. He had shown up to the reading in wrinkled clothes reeking of alcohol, clearly expecting to receive something. Now his eyes narrowed as he glared at me. "This has to be a mistake," he finally sputtered. "They would not leave me nothing. I am their grandson, too." Mr. Thompson adjusted his glasses again. "There is no mistake, Albert. Your grandparents amended their will 5 years ago. After careful consideration, everything is in order." Albert stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the pictures on the wall. I sat in that office for another hour, discussing details with Mr. Thompson and trying to process both my grief and the enormous responsibility I had just inherited. 3 days later, I received a call from a number I did not recognize. It was my mother, Diane, who I had not spoken to in nearly 2 years. "Nathan, darling, I just heard about your grandparents." "I am devastated," she said, her voice dripping with an emotion that sounded rehearsed. "I know we have not been close, but family should come together in times like these." Something in her tone made my stomach tighten. Diane had never shown interest in my grandparents while they were alive, criticizing their old-fashioned ways and judgment whenever the topic arose. Now suddenly she was devastated and interested in family connections. "Thanks for calling, Mom," I said cautiously. "It has been hard." "I am sure it has. Listen, I was thinking I could come visit, help you sort through their things, you know. That big house must feel so empty now." And there it was, the real reason for her call. She had somehow heard about the inheritance already. "I appreciate the offer, but I am managing." "Okay," I replied. The conversation ended with her promising to check in soon, a promise I knew she would keep now that there was potential financial gain involved. The warning signs started small. Albert began stopping by the house, unannounced, something he had never done while our grandparents were alive. He would arrive with coffee and donuts, asking how I was holding up and offering to help with household chores. "Just want to be there for you, bro," he would say, clapping me on the shoulder. "Family has to stick together, right?" But I noticed how his eyes wandered around the rooms, lingering on the antique grandfather clock in the hall or the oil paintings in the living room. Once I returned from the bathroom to find him quickly shutting a desk drawer in our grandfather's study. "Just looking for a pen," he said with an unconvincing smile. My mother's calls became weekly occurrences. She asked detailed questions about the estate that made me increasingly uncomfortable. "Have you thought about what you will do with all that money, sweetie? 900,000 is a lot for someone your age to manage. You know I have some experience with investments." The woman who could never balance a checkbook or hold a job for more than 6 months was now offering me financial advice. It would have been laughable if it were not so transparent. Then items began disappearing. First it was small things. I might not notice a silver letter opener from the desk, a crystal paperweight that had been a retirement gift to my grandfather. But when I discovered that my grandmother's pearl necklace was missing from her jewelry box, I knew I had a serious problem. I installed a basic security camera system the next day, hiding one camera in the bookshelf in the study. 3 days later, I watched the footage of Albert carefully searching through files in my grandfather's desk, pocketing what looked like a gold pocket watch. I confronted him the following afternoon when he showed up with his usual forced cheerfulness and box of donuts. "I know you took Grandpa's watch," I said as soon as he stepped into the foyer, "and other things too." His friendly facade crumbled instantly. "You think you deserve all this?" he spat, gesturing wildly around him. "You were always their favorite. Perfect little Nathan who could do no wrong." "This is not about favorites, Albert. It is about respect. Those things meant something to them. They meant something to me too," he shouted, his face reddening. "I am their grandson too. I deserve a share of what they left behind." "Then maybe you should have shown up for something other than money while they were alive," I replied, my own anger rising. "Maybe you should have been there when Grandma was dying of grief instead of being unreachable for weeks." Albert's eyes narrowed to slits. "You self-righteous little I want the watch back, and everything else you took. Good luck proving anything," he sneered, moving toward the door. "This is not over, Nathan." Not by a long shot. As he yanked the door open, my mother Diane was standing there, hand raised to knock. For a moment she looked startled, but then her eyes met Albert's, and something passed between them. "Oh, Albert, I did not know you would be here," she said with obviously fake surprise. "I just stopped by to check on Nathan." "Save it, Mom," I said tiredly. "I know you two have been talking." She stepped inside, dropping all pretense of innocence. "You know you are just like your father. Selfish to the core, always thinking you deserve more than everyone else. I think you both should leave," I said, holding the door open wider. As they walked out, I heard my mother whisper to Albert, "We will try another approach." That night, lying in bed in my childhood room, I realized I needed professional help to protect my grandparents' legacy. The next morning, I called Jessica Barnes, a friend from college who had become an estate attorney. We had stayed in loose contact over the years, occasionally meeting for coffee when she was in town. She agreed to meet me that afternoon at her office downtown. "So let me get this straight," Jessica said after I explained the situation. "Your brother and mother, who were essentially estranged from your grandparents, are now circling the inheritance like vultures." Pretty much, I confirmed. The woman who could never balance a checkbook or hold a job for more than 6 months was now offering me financial advice. It would have been laughable if it were not so transparent. Then items began disappearing. First, it was small things. I might not notice a silver letter opener from the desk, a crystal paperweight that had been a retirement gift to my grandfather. But when I discovered that my grandmother's pearl necklace was missing from her jewelry box, I knew I had a serious problem. Siblings forging documents, children forcing elderly parents to change wills, relatives breaking into homes and claiming items were gifts. Once money enters the picture, people can become unrecognizable. "What can I do?" I asked, feeling overwhelmed. "The will is clear, but I am worried they might try something I have not thought of." "Your instincts are good." Jessica nodded. "The will is solid, but there are other vulnerabilities." That same evening, while taking out the trash, I overheard Albert on his phone in the driveway of a house across the street. He was visiting a friend who lived there, unaware of my presence in the darkness. "We just need to use the old papers of Grandpa's, the ones with his signature," he was saying in a hushed but excited voice. "Diane thinks it will work because the dates line up. Yeah, the lawyer says with the notary stamp, we could make a case that." It adds a significant layer of protection, makes any probate challenges much more difficult, and keeps the details private, unlike a will. We spent the next 2 hours discussing the details. I decided to name the trust the Marigold Trust after my grandmother's favorite flowers that she planted every spring along the garden path. "This will take some time and paperwork," Jessica warned. "But once it is done, the assets will be much more secure." Over the next 3 weeks, we worked through the complex process of setting up the trust and transferring all assets into it. The house, the bank accounts, the personal property, everything went into the Marigold Trust. Jessica also helped me update all the insurance policies and utility accounts to reflect the new ownership structure. "I hope you never need this," she said, as we signed the final papers. "But if you do, you will be glad we took these steps." I kept the trust arrangement completely to myself. No one except Jessica and the necessary bank officials knew about it. I hoped it was excessive caution that would never be needed, but something told me to prepare for the worst. In the months that followed, my relationship with Albert and Diane deteriorated further. After our confrontation, they stopped coming around for a while, but their cold silence was more concerning than their previous attempts at friendliness. I tried reaching out to Albert on his birthday, inviting him to dinner at his favorite steakhouse. "I know things have been tense," I texted, "but you are still my brother. Let me treat you to a good meal." His reply was curt. "Not interested in your charity." I even offered to help him financially with some of his gambling debts, thinking that a gesture of goodwill might ease the tension. "I know things have been tight," I said during a rare phone call. "I could loan you some money to get back on your feet." "I do not want your handouts," he snarled. "I want what should have been mine to begin with. I do not need your pocket change. I deserve my share of the estate." My mother was equally hostile. She began spreading rumors among our extended family, cousins, aunts, and uncles. We rarely saw that I had manipulated my grandparents in their final years to secure the inheritance. Nathan always was the sneaky one, she told my Aunt Carol, who later called me concerned, always buttering them up while Albert was struggling with real problems. He probably made them think Albert did not care about them. The isolation was difficult to bear. Family gatherings became awkward affairs with relatives giving me sidelong glances, clearly having heard Diane's version of events. A few reached out privately to say they did not believe her, but most kept their distance, unwilling to get involved in the dispute. Through a mutual acquaintance, I learned that Albert was facing serious financial troubles. His gambling had escalated, and he reportedly owed nearly $80,000 to some dangerous people. This explained the increasing desperation I sensed from him. One evening, my neighbor, Mrs. Fitzgerald, who had been close with my grandparents for decades, came over with a homemade casserole. "I thought you might want to know," she said hesitantly as she stood in my kitchen. "Your brother was here yesterday while you were at work. He was walking around the property taking pictures of the house. When I asked what he was doing, he said he was documenting the family home for a real estate appraisal." My blood ran cold. "Did he say anything else?" "He asked me how much I thought houses in this neighborhood were going for these days. Said he was just curious. I did not like the look in his eyes, Nathan. It reminded me of when he was a teenager and up to no good." I thanked her for the information and the casserole. That night, I checked all the locks again and was grateful for the security system I had installed. The discovery came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Albert had left his jacket at Mrs. Fitzgerald's house after chatting with her. When she brought it over to me thinking I could return it to him, a folded document fell from the pocket. Property transfer was printed across the top in bold letters. I only glimpsed a few lines before deciding it was not my place to read it, but those lines were enough to set off alarm bells. I returned the document to the pocket and thanked Mrs. Fitzgerald. A few reached out privately to say they did not believe her, but most kept their distance, unwilling to get involved in the dispute. Through a mutual acquaintance, I learned that Albert was facing serious financial troubles. His gambling had escalated, and he reportedly owed nearly $80,000 to some dangerous people. This explained the increasing desperation I sensed from him. One evening, my neighbor, Mrs. "Right, exactly. He will have no idea until it is done." I ducked back inside before he could spot me, my heart pounding. The next morning, I called Jessica immediately. "They are planning something with forged documents," I explained, recounting what I had seen and heard. "Unfortunately, that fits a pattern I have seen before," she replied grimly. That same evening, while taking out the trash, I overheard Albert on his phone in the driveway of a house across the street. He was visiting a friend who lived there, unaware of my presence in the darkness. "We just need to use the old papers of Grandpa's, the ones with his signature," he was saying in a hushed but excited voice. "Diane thinks it will work because the dates line up. Yeah, the lawyer says with the notary stamp, we could make a case that." "The good news is the trust gives us a strong advantage," Jessica reassured me. "Even if they produce some document claiming the house was promised to Albert, the trust takes precedence because it contains the most recent legal expression of your grandparents' wishes." I also discovered through an old friend who worked at Albert's regular casino that he was indeed deeply in debt, closer to $80,000 than I had initially thought. He had been banned from 3 local establishments for failing to pay his markers. With this information, I took additional precautions. I installed more comprehensive security cameras, changed all the locks, and made sure important documents were securely stored in a safe deposit box at my bank. Jessica helped me prepare a cease and desist letter in case their harassment escalated. The feeling of betrayal cut deep. These were the people who should have been supporting me through the grief of losing my grandparents. Instead, they were plotting to take what did not belong to them, with no regard for the wishes of the people who had worked their entire lives to build this legacy. One night, checking the security footage, I discovered something that chilled me to the bone. My mother had somehow obtained a spare key to the house. The cameras caught her testing it in the back door lock at 3 in the morning while I was asleep upstairs. The door was deadbolted from the inside, so she could not enter, but the fact that she had tried was deeply disturbing. It happened on a Friday evening in late October. I had just returned from work and was preparing dinner when I heard the distinctive sound of Albert's truck pulling into the driveway. Looking out the window, I saw my mother was with him, both of them emerging from the vehicle with smug expressions that made my stomach knot instantly. I met them at the door before they could knock. Albert, Diane. This is unexpected. Albert was practically vibrating with malicious glee. Not as unexpected as, what we have to tell you, little brother. They pushed past me into the foyer. My mother was wearing more makeup than usual and an outfit that looked new, clearly dressed for what she considered a victory celebration. "We have been busy," Albert announced, pulling a folder from inside his jacket. "Very busy." "What is this about?" I asked, though. I already had a sinking feeling I knew. "This house," Albert said, slapping the folder against his palm, "is now legally mine." My mother nodded enthusiastically. "We found an earlier will your grandfather made, before you started manipulating them." "That is right," Albert continued, clearly enjoying himself. "Turns out Grandpa left the house to me, specifically. The property is in my name now, all legal and official. We have just come from finalizing the paperwork." I fought to keep my expression neutral. "Is that so?" "The lawyer said the most recent document takes precedence," my mother added, examining her freshly manicured nails. "And this will was apparently never properly superseded. Something about improper witnessing on the later version." Albert stepped closer, his face inches from mine. "You have until Friday to get out. That gives you 1 week to pack your stuff and find somewhere else to live." "And if I refuse," I asked quietly, "then I will have people come and remove you and your belongings," he threatened, his voice dropping, "and they will not be gentle about it." My mother walked around the living room, already eyeing the furniture as if deciding what to keep and what to discard. "Such a shame to break up a family over material things, Nathan. You really should have been more willing to share." Albert was still staring me down, expecting fear or anger or pleading. Instead, I simply smiled slightly and asked, "You both really think you can make this happen?" The question seemed to throw him off balance momentarily. His eyebrows furrowed in confusion before the arrogant smile returned. "It is already done, little brother. I am going to sell this place and live like Grandpa and Grandma should have lived instead of hoarding their money like you." I nodded slowly. "Well, I guess we will see how that works out for you." My calm response clearly unsettled them both. They had expected hysterics, maybe begging. My mother recovered first, shooting me a venomous look, "Always so smug, just like your father." "Well, enjoy your last week in this house." As they turned to leave, Albert called over his shoulder, "Start packing, Nathan. Friday I am bringing a truck. Anything left behind gets thrown out." The door slammed behind them, and I immediately reached for my phone to call Jessica. They did what Jessica exclaimed when I explained what had just happened. "That is unbelievably brazen, even for family disputes." "They claim they found an earlier will and that the house now belongs to Albert," I repeated. "They say I have until Friday to move out." "This is exactly why we set up the Marigold Trust," Jessica said, and I could hear her already shuffling papers on her end of the line. "Even if they somehow found a legitimate earlier will, which I seriously doubt, the property was transferred to the trust months ago, your grandfather no longer owned it directly at the time of his death, so no will would override that." We arranged to meet early the next morning to prepare all the necessary documentation. Jessica would bring copies of the trust documents, property transfer records, and the original will. She also suggested having a notary present and alerting the local police to potential trespassing, just in case Albert tried to force his way in. They are bluffing, she assured me. Or they have been misled by someone. Either way, legally, you are completely protected. After ending the call, I sat in my grandfather's old leather chair in the study surrounded by books he had collected over decades. I ran my hand over the worn wooden desk where he had taught me to balance a checkbook and fill out my first tax return. The thought of Albert selling this house, erasing all these memories for quick cash, made my chest ache with a pain that had nothing to do with the legal threat. That night, I could not sleep. I paced through the rooms of the house, touching family photographs and heirlooms, remembering the stories attached to each one. My grandmother's collection of first edition classic novels, the hand-carved chess set my grandfather had bought on their 25th anniversary trip to Italy, the quilt on my bed that my grandmother had made from scraps of my childhood clothes. None of these things would mean anything to Albert or my mother. To them, they were just items to be sold, their value measured only in dollars. They did not hear my grandmother's laugh when I looked at the funny portrait she had commissioned of their cat, or feel my grandfather's steady presence when I sat at his workbench in the garage. Around 3 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Albert Hope, "You are packing, TikTok." I set the phone aside without responding and continued my vigil through the house, mentally cataloging the pieces of my grandparents that lived on in these walls. By morning, I was exhausted but resolute. This was not just about property or money anymore. This was about honoring two people who had given me everything. Friday morning dawned clear and crisp. Jessica arrived at 8 with a notary and all the necessary documentation neatly organized in a leather portfolio. We went through everything one last time, making sure all the papers were in order. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, as we heard vehicles pulling into the driveway. I nodded, taking a deep breath. As ready as I will ever be. Looking out the window, I saw Albert's truck, my mother's sedan, and a large moving van. Albert and my mother emerged first, followed by 2 burly men who were presumably there to help empty the house. Albert was pointing at various windows, clearly already planning where to start. Jessica and I stepped out onto the porch as they approached. The moment they saw Jessica standing beside me with her portfolio, they faltered slightly. Confusion flickered across Albert's face, quickly replaced by annoyance. "Who is this?" he demanded, gesturing at Jessica. "Jessica Barnes, attorney at law," she replied professionally. "I represent both Nathan and the Marigold Trust, which is the legal owner of this property." Albert looked to my mother, who seemed equally confused. What trust? What is she talking about? Perhaps we should all sit down, I suggested, gesturing to the porch furniture. There seems to be some confusion about the ownership of this house. "There is no confusion," Albert snapped, recovering his bravado. "I have the paperwork right here." He waved a folder, similar to the one he had shown me earlier. The 2 movers shifted uncomfortably behind them, clearly sensing they had walked into something unexpected. Jessica opened her portfolio and extracted several official-looking documents. 6 months ago, following the reading of the will, Nathan established the Marigold Trust. All assets inherited from his grandparents, including this house and property, were legally transferred into that trust. She laid out the documents on the small porch table. "Here are the property transfer records duly recorded with the county. Here is the trust establishment paperwork. And here," she said, pulling out another document, "is a letter from the county recorder's office confirming that the property is currently owned by the Marigold Trust, not by either Harrison Reynolds or Albert Reynolds." My mother snatched up one of the documents, her eyes scanning it frantically. "This cannot be right," the lawyer said. "Whatever lawyer you consulted was either mistaken or misleading you." Jessica interrupted smoothly. "The facts are clear. This property has not been in Harrison Reynolds' estate since May. It belongs to the trust with Nathan as the trustee and beneficiary." Albert's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "This is some kind of trick," he sputtered. "You made this up." "The notary here can verify the authenticity of all documents," Jessica replied calmly, gesturing to the notary who had been quietly observing. "Additionally, I have taken the liberty of contacting the local police department to alert them to a potential trespassing situation today. They are on standby if needed." As if on cue, a police cruiser pulled up to the curb. Officer Davis, who had been briefed on the situation, stepped out but remained by his vehicle watching. Albert saw the police car and turned back to me, fury and disbelief battling on his face. "You sneaky little... You planned this all along." "I protected what my grandparents wanted me to have," I said simply. "Just like they protected me when I needed them." My mother burst into tears, the dramatic attention-seeking kind she had perfected over the years. "How could you do this to your family? You are killing your grandparents all over again with this betrayal." Jessica stepped forward. "Mrs. Reynolds, Mr. Reynolds, I strongly advise you to leave the premises now. Any attempt to enter the house or remove property will constitute criminal trespassing and theft." The movers had already started backing away toward their truck, wanting no part of this family drama or potential legal trouble. One of them muttered something to Albert about calling us when this is sorted out before they both climbed into their vehicle. Albert took a threatening step toward me, his hands clenched into fists. "This is not over. I will fight this in court. I will make sure everyone knows what you did." Officer Davis chose that moment to approach the porch. "Is everything all right here?" Albert glared at me with pure hatred before spinning on his heel and storming back to his truck. My mother followed, still sobbing theatrically, pausing only to turn and point a finger at me. "You are no son of mine. Not anymore." They drove away in separate vehicles, Albert's tires squealing on the asphalt. The moving van followed a moment later, leaving Officer Davis, Jessica, the notary, and me standing in sudden silence. "Well," Jessica said after a moment that went about as expected. Once everyone had left, the full weight of what had just happened crashed down on me. I sank onto the porch steps, my legs suddenly unable to support me. Jessica sat beside me, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing, Nathan. Your grandparents would be proud." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. I had just lost the last remaining members of my immediate family. Even knowing they had tried to steal from me, the finality of that break hit hard. "They will probably try to contest the trust," Jessica warned gently. "It would be a losing battle, but Albert seems angry enough to try anyway." She was right. 3 days later, I was served with papers indicating Albert was challenging the validity of both the will and the trust. Jessica had anticipated this and filed a motion to dismiss immediately. As she had predicted, the case was thrown out within weeks due to lack of evidence. The judge was particularly unimpressed by the supposedly earlier will Albert produced, which showed clear signs of alteration. Through mutual connections, I learned that Albert and my mother had been planning this move for months. They had consulted with several lawyers before finding one willing to take their case, and had even practiced their confrontation, expecting me to crumble under pressure. I also discovered that my mother had been encouraging Albert's scheme primarily because he had promised her 30% of the proceeds when he sold the house. Money, as always, was her primary motivation. The emails I received from her in the aftermath were vicious, blaming me for everything from Albert's gambling problems to her own failed relationships. One particularly nasty message accused me of having always been a selfish little snake, just waiting to take advantage of 2 old people who could not see through you. I did not respond to any of her messages. There was nothing to say that would make any difference. Some family bonds, I was learning, cannot be repaired once broken. Sometimes the healthiest choice is to accept that and move forward. In the months that followed, I focused on healing and rebuilding. The house that had been a source of such conflict became my personal project. I renovated room by room, preserving the character my grandparents had loved while adding my own touches. The kitchen where my grandmother had taught me to bake now had modern appliances, but still featured her handwritten recipes framed on the wall. My grandfather's study gained a new desk, but kept his beloved bookshelves and reading lamp. I made financial decisions I knew would honor their memory too. $10,000 went to the local library where my grandmother had volunteered after retirement. They used it to create a reading garden with marigolds planted along the borders. With Jessica's help, I established a small scholarship at the community college in my grandparents' names. It would help one student each year who demonstrated the values they had embodied: hard work, integrity, and service to others. These gestures helped me feel connected to them still, like I was extending their influence in the world even though they were gone. My social circle changed dramatically during this time. Friends who had drifted away during my caregiving period returned offering support and company. I joined a grief support group and met others who understood the complicated emotions of losing family, both to death and to estrangement. "Family is who shows up," said Marcus, a man in my group who had lost his parents and cut ties with an abusive sister. "Sometimes the family you choose is more real than the family you are born into." His words resonated deeply. I began hosting regular dinner parties in the dining room that had sat empty for too long. The house filled with new voices and new memories, layering over the old ones without erasing them. I also learned the importance of boundaries in all relationships. The experience with Albert and Diane had taught me that love should never be used as leverage and that healthy connections require mutual respect. "Your grandparents knew what they were doing," Jessica told me over coffee months after the confrontation. "They saw who you truly were, and they trusted you to carry forward the values they lived by." Those words brought me more peace than anything else. In protecting their legacy from those who would squander it, I had honored not just their possessions, but their principles. 2 years after inheriting my grandparents' estate, I sat in the renovated sunroom, watching the spring marigolds bloom in the garden. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, as though it had absorbed all the new laughter and friendship that had filled it recently. I had not heard from Albert in over a year. Mutual acquaintances said he had moved to another state after his gambling debts became too dangerous to ignore. My mother occasionally sent holiday cards with thinly veiled guilt trips, which I acknowledged with brief, polite responses. The truth I had come to accept was that money does not create greed or selfishness. It merely reveals character that was already there. My grandparents had seen that truth clearly, even when it broke their hearts to acknowledge it in their own son and grandson. In protecting their legacy, I had discovered my own strength and values. I had learned that standing firm does not make you hard, and that forgiveness does not require allowing further harm. Most importantly, I had learned that true family, is built on love and respect, not merely shared DNA. I now volunteer at a financial literacy program for young adults, teaching the principles my grandfather instilled in me. When students ask about my story, I tell them the most important lesson my grandparents taught me, that a true legacy is not measured in dollars, but in the lives you touch and the values you uphold. The Marigold Trust still exists, protecting the assets my grandparents worked so hard to build. Someday, I hope to pass those assets to people who will value them not for their monetary worth, but for the love and wisdom they represent. Sometimes, as I sit in my grandfather's chair or tend my grandmother's garden, I feel their presence around me, not as ghosts, but as the values they instilled that have become part of who I am. In those moments, I know they would be proud of the choices I made and the life I am building. Sometimes the greatest inheritance is not what we receive, but what we choose to do with it. Have you ever had to protect something important from people who did not understand its true value? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more real-life stories about family legacy and standing up for what is right. Thanks for listening, and remember, true wealth is measured in how we treat each other, not in what we own.